So, I don't usually comment on things that happen that are so usually like, oh dear, this is the current thing that's happening. I might as well talk about it because it's gonna get attention. Also, that tends to be my whole philosophy with YouTube in the first place, along with, anything that I start out with. Although it's mainly specific to YouTube in general, might as well help clear that up. With YouTube, you might wonder if I've ever monetized any of my videos, even the ones that have got a ludicrous amount of views for the expectations of a channel like mine. You might wonder why I haven't monetized any of my videos or even wanted to go for a partnership. I don't know if you've seen ads on my videos or not, but obviously because I've got a million content IDs that I just don't care about because that's just general YouTube. You're gonna have to deal with that apparently because there's a million things that they'll think you've used, even stuff you've basically never even heard of and wouldn't even be relevant to a specific point in the video. Yeah, bots are great. I started my channel in 2011 with the idea that I wanted to be like YouTubers at the time while I made the channel, which was, you make videos for fun as a hobby and they end up on a site that lots of people can see. That's how YouTube was before it just turned into a job for some individuals. And that's the reason that I just want to go old YouTube is exactly the reason that I've never monetized any of my videos or any of my things, and hence why I'm struggling with any of the features on my channel because I just don't care. Yeah. But that's not why I'm going on about today. But usually, people will get all sorts of attention about the current things that are happening, and they're all big and massive, and boy, wouldn't it be interesting if everyone got that same amount of attention for that big, massive thing that's happening, and then they would get all the muns. Well, here, I just want to talk about a thing because that thing kinda has a couple of relations to the other ranty video I made, which, got a fair amount of attention from some people who basically forgot I existed. And I might as well do it again because, this is something I feel pretty strongly about, and I feel, you know what, people aren't always as they seem. Why not go further on that particular point? So anyway, and this one's gonna have a lot of name referencing, and it's probably gonna become dated in a couple of months, or years even. And we're all just gonna look back at this and think, oh boy, remember when that was a thing? So recently, in the Gmod Splatoon SFM community, you can conglomerate all of those into one single thing, and I'm gonna go over that in a bit. The community has gone through a very major blow-up. Mostly because one very loud portion of the community, mostly comprised of young children who have either played or not played the game, but have definitely watched videos of two people, one of which has basically acted as a sexual predator in his lifetime, the other a complete and utter bully and liar, both of which have been in the past extremely famous and idols to these children that I previously mentioned. This is mostly thanks to a couple of channels who are very big in the general Gmod community who have noticed these people's actions, along with noticing the general poor quality of the on the surface level of Splatoon content that people create. And I've mostly stayed away from all this, to be honest. There was a point during the Ellie point with Heavy where I did end up in a Discord call with them at one point. And I know this because I recorded the whole thing. Mainly because it was going to be my first call with Heavy, and it was going to be about a particularly awkward incident. And I definitely wanted to capture what he said on camera if he was to say anything he was going to disprove later. The only reason I haven't uploaded the voice track or voice clip of this voice call is mainly because a friend of mine was with me in that call, and I'm not particularly sure if he necessarily wants his voice revealed, and I don't have the best audio set up when recording and editing, so I'm not necessarily going to be able to completely filter that out, and it's going to be pretty annoying if I had to blank out the video, because you wouldn't know who's talking half the time, because I'm not usually speaking most of the video. Heavy's being Heavy, and then there's like some other people who dump their way into the call, and it's like an hour long, and I don't know if I want to edit all of that. But that's like my only involvement in the whole thing. I do remember while the events were happening, while Ellie had just recently broken up with Heavy, thanks to the friend she mentioned in the Channel Checker Heavy video, who I'm not going to name here, but I know exactly who she means. And we talked a long time. It was like a couple weeks while we were, having friendly chats and all that. And it was after this that, we got wound up in a completely unrelated incident, and she ended up lying to me about something that really ticked me off, and I didn't necessarily want to talk with her anymore, but that's completely unrelated to the whole thing. Thing is, though, I do remember talking with her about that, and it was through that I ended up getting in the call with Heavy in the first place. And that's my only involvement in this whole thing. And it clearly did nothing, given everything that has been revealed in the videos as of recently. Although most of the stuff in the videos is very old. I, in fact, knew of the picture. You know that picture. The one that everyone's calling gross. I knew of that picture well before most of the people viewing those videos did. So, yeah. So anyway, the community's blown up about it. I've just been watching from the sidelines the videos, what's going on, I'm not so massively as I'm gonna comment on anything, pick a side, do whatever. It's just not anything I'm really that massively involved in. Again, I only sat in one call related to the incident and overheard some portions of the points where she mentioned she was getting mauled by his fans for breaking up with him on her own accord, that which I'll definitely disagree with. In fact, I made a picture about it, but nobody even viewed it, because haha, I'm so alone. The community's had a recent blowout with both him and Amiga Mario 89. Yes, I said the name. You don't have to try and find me, because one, you're not going to be able to do that very easily. Two, it really doesn't matter. I'm going to remember you as that and that alone, and your new stupid name is as stupid as the other guys. I say even with the username I have. So, the community's blown up about this. I've said this about the 10th time already. And I've just been watching from the sidelines. But usually, I tend to be more of the, I want to see most of the sides of this, just so I know I'm not on the total wrongs. And I'm seeing a lot of, and have seen, not just in the comments, but in other places as well, specifically the places where this stuff was even revealed in the first place, assumptions that are more hyperbole than they are really true about the Splatoon community in general. Both Splatoon normal and the Splatoon Source Engine Gmod SFM community. Stuff which I haven't really ever been able to clear up. Stuff which kind of drives me up a wall in some cases, especially since our reputation is kind of blown up thanks to those two individuals, but half of that is mostly just people not really seeing what's behind the veil in all cases. So, after the first one with Heavy back in February, I'd done this before. I think it was the one to do with Lizzie, and I briefly peeked into Pic's server to see what the kind of reaction was when they were talking about when the video had released. What were they saying? What had they found out? What were they talking about? And I'd done that before. I peeked in their server, scrolled up for a bit, watched their little chat log, and then left as if it never happened. I did the same with Heavy. I figured, okay, if this video is going to be 20 minutes long and most of it's about a thing that happened 8 months ago at this point of recording, but it was earlier. If they're going to make a 20-minute video about that, I want to see what their reactions were before that. So I did, and ended up staying longer than I'd liked to. And I became a regular member of the server, basically. I don't tend to want to join a server unless there are people there that I particularly care about, the server's topic is something that I particularly care about, or like, I'm gonna be in there often. Because otherwise, I'm not gonna join a server if I don't have anything in common with any of the people in there, or I don't simply care. And that's why I only have about 3 servers in my Discord chat, because I don't like to have 15 places where I know I'm not going to visit them again. Because that's kinda silly, in my opinion. So, I was hanging out in the server for a bit. They were all talking about things and that. There were a couple of others who had followed along trying to see this guy's content, who had, stumbled upon the server and wanted to talk probably. And, it was all fine and dandy. The reactions were fairly tame at the start, but then it devolved into what you kind of see in the comments of those mainly Pic's videos, but not the rest of them. The rest of them are kind of just messenger stuff. They don't really understand the full context, so it's not as simple there, but it is still prevalent. This major assumption that, because these two have made such a footing in being so that basically somehow speaks for the entirety of the Splatoon community. Even the people that don't use the Source engine to create animations or posters or pictures of their particular characters, even if, putting the Splatoon community under one umbrella, and you can't necessarily help that because, you gotta say things quickly so then you can get to the point you're trying to make, which in those videos, I guess, they have to get to the point that they want to talk about quickly, so they just use the Splatoon community as an umbrella. But I guess the problem with receiving that information is that many people think that the Splatoon community is only comprised of these particular individuals, or individuals like that. It's either the people who are doing the bad things, or the kids defending them in their eyes, because they make the most noise. And here's where I say, you are so darn wrong. It's ridiculous. So me and this server, I was hanging out there for a fair while. I was just hanging out there because, they made that video, and that video is pretty funny. Well, one dude made the video, and these people probably sided with him, gave him evidence, and found out about this for him. So, they probably got some interesting methods in terms of talking. Or, they're interesting to talk to, I hung out there, and I saw, for a while, that other Splatoon community members, like people who had even commented in those videos saying, oh, isn't it so great, you're exposing Heavy, or like, well, now they probably are saying the same about Omega, that you're exposing them, it's so amazing to see that you're saving the Splatoon community and all that. And like, I absolutely agree, especially since I was kind of hinting towards that in the other video anyway, that people aren't necessarily always as they project themselves to be on YouTube. If they are putting themselves out as, say, oh, I've got 37,000 subscribers, so I'm okay, and I'm gonna make really crappy animations in stop motion helper, and I've got 1 million kids who are subbed to me, so you can probably join up and find another kid that you have my videos in common with as an interest, Like, I was kind of hinting towards that they, just because they make animations and stuff, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the most perfect people behind those instances, as I experienced myself with Sarmid 3, who did a very similar occurrence in the SM64 community, where this very thing basically happened as well. It just happened to be that this was around 5 years ago, 4 to 5 years ago, and there were like maybe a couple videos of truth videos putting out proof against him, and like people were constantly defending him, like, oh, he's the savior of the community, he's the leader, he must be defended because he makes content that I like, and like, it's like, you can't really see the problems yet. Like, I've had experience in this kind of thing before, hence why I'm mostly so quiet about it, to be honest, because I've already gone through it once. Don't necessarily want to have to go through the not accepting criticism points all over again, even though I'm probably gonna see it like 20 more times in my lifetime. Isn't that just fantastic? People are great. But yeah, I agree that they've done really bad things, and I totally understand that, like, they themselves probably shouldn't be trusted with the things they're doing at their age, whatever they're doing. I'm totally in service of what the points those videos provide. I'm totally in service of that, but yet I tend to want to be a little different. Especially with what I mentioned about Ellie. I was talking with her a couple of weeks while the incident was occurring, but like, we had an argument and then we stopped talking because I didn't want to necessarily talk to someone with such dishonesty, necessarily. And I'm not going to go into specifics because that's not for YouTube, but I mean, that in itself is kind of an example. So I agree with the points the videos make about, Heavy and Omega are so bad. And I absolutely agree. I haven't talked a whole lot with Heavy, but I know I've talked a whole lot with Omega. I know that he's, first of all, makes terrible videos, too, and he does all the stuff that he does behind the scenes, and, the other videos speak for themselves, and his general attitude. I already had question marks around him. And in fact, like, even, like, while Ellie mentioned in the video that Omega did some stupid thing because Tina told him to stop hating on Sonic, I think I very much remember Tina actually talking about that. Because that was during, I think, like, while I was in Sky's server, before all the things happened. And I remember I was in a call while this was happening, while Tina was stating that Omega was acting really stupid and really immature. I remember all that. And, like, that was well past the point where I was done friending him and had no idea all of this was going on. But I already could kind of tell that they were nasty and nasty. And, like, I'll just go, like, briefly, before I talk about the general assumptions of the server, I'll just talk about my brief experiences with, not Heavy, because I've already told you about the call, that's all I've had, with Omega. I'll tell you about my brief experience with Omega. I friended him at one point. I think it was like late or mid 2016. I don't exactly remember exactly when. It was while he was slightly gaining popularity. He was like a major name, but nobody knew that he was doing anything yet. I think Ellie was still with Heavy. And like, you know, people were busy doing ships and stuff. It was all like peaceful in the community with that dark veil. And then, like, okay, we were friends for a bit, and this was during, it was definitely during while I was still in school, because Amiga would periodically, when he was done with a video, and this was fairly often, would send me what he had made of a particular video that day. I remember he sent me a video one day. It was of a video, I think it's called Wario Land Gary's Mod 3 now, but I can't remember. And it might probably be deleted by the time you're watching or listening to this, so... It was just a video about Wario attempting to steal a gold object, and some Inklings were guarding that gold object. And it's your typical cartoon cliche of bad guy attempts to steal object and attempts multiple ways, failing each time, and then the final way knocks him out for good, and he never wants to steal the thing again because, oh no, that final thing was too much for me to overcome. You wonder why I don't watch stuff like this, but... Like, he would send me stuff like that, and I wasn't necessarily interested most of the time. I didn't necessarily want to watch his videos after a while because they were pretty low intelligence. And then he sent me a script. A script for... He'd made an announcement at the time, I think it's deleted, about that he wanted to make a Misadventures series. A Misadventures that was basically a Splatoon cartoon series with animation and stuff, with his basic cartoon tropes of stuff. I'll link the documents in the description because I still have those documents as evidence as to why I didn't want to friend him anymore. But these scripts were of extremely low quality. It was amazing how low you could go with this kind of script thing. And the very first line that I'm supposed to say, because he wanted me to voice act for this, like, voice act, use your own voice in a video, basically, in his terms and definitions. Me voicing over this entire video right now is considered voice acting. That's how, say, Lizzie can get away with calling herself a voice actor, because you're voice acting in front of a microphone to put yourself on YouTube. That's what they considered voice acting. And so he wanted me to voice act for this Misadventures thing, because I'm in, like, 2 portions of the script. The very first scene, which I'm in, because I think it's a scene, you can read it in the script, but it's a scene where me, Lizzie, Omega, Spider, and Heavy are all sitting, like, near a train station because there's this new arrival coming, and I bet you can already tell the script from this point onward. And at one, like, the very first line I'm supposed to say in the script is, and this is going to be done really poorly, but I bet he's dreamy, and I'm supposed to purr at that point. The implication of the scene is that I'm supposed to voice what would be my Inkling, my character. So I'm technically supposed to say this. It's supposed to represent me. I feel, personally, really uncomfortable with saying something like that, because I wouldn't say that. Period. The stereotype of the character that I was put in was the general stereotype of the girl who constantly and won't ever stop thinking about boys, and will, you know, is obsessed about them for some awkward reason. And it's very apparent in that one sentence. And I never told him, but I am extremely uncomfortable with voicing something like that if it's supposed to represent me. Like, okay, if it was, say, some sort of other character that I'm just using my voice for, and, like, you put in brackets that I'm supposed to be voicing this part, like, say you put the character's name, and then you put me, like, in brackets to say, this is what you're supposed to voice. Like, I would understand, because that's not necessarily me directly, but this character, especially given it's heavily implied, given the other characters' names, that this is supposed to be Inkling Land, and that it was heavily supposed to represent you, I do not necessarily want to be perceived that way. And, by the way, back then, I did give him criticism on how to improve certain parts of the script. I don't remember what parts they were, and I don't remember which ones are the edited ones. I'll just give you all 4 scripts, the original ones and the edited ones, because he did listen then to my criticisms on what to improve, but the script ideas were so broken beyond repair that no matter what I would tell him to fix, the end result would just be cringy anyway, and you can read it for yourself. I mean, it kind of hits a new low when you get to one of the parts where I think it's regarding a Stigum, which I looked up. It's like some TF2 soldier with a deer hat, and it's turned into an animal. And, okay, I'm going to very briefly describe this because it's gross to me too, where he tries to deal with the Stigum because it's scratching itself a lot. It's dragging its butt along the ground all the time, and that's not very good. So I think there's a scene even where you look up the thing's butt and there are worms, and they talk. Yeah, that's as far as I'm going, because, oh god, you can read it for yourself. I have not edited anything. In fact, they're like read-only view mode on my thing when I first got them. Like, there's a virus in this. Oh boy, I bet the only virus in this is that it's going to have terrible writing. And very not safe for work subjects. But, yeah. It was shortly after this that I began to not care about his videos anymore and just didn't say anything to him and got rid of him off my friends list. Good thing, too, considering what happened afterwards and his downward spiral of attitude. So, yeah, I'm not necessarily 100% with either of the two men on my end. And there's a number of people in the Splatoon Gmod community in the parts that aren't as so focused on that don't necessarily care either. They don't want to. They think it's gross and disgusting and horrible too that these things have occurred and been given a massive light as they have been. And so while I was hanging in this server, it was all fine and dandy, and there were some people in the community who were saying all that stuff that I was saying before, that they were happy that that Pick had exposed the bad guys. And, things were okay for a bit, but as they started posting more and more artwork, things began getting a little bit more hostile, and it was a couple weeks in where a couple of them were outright claiming in Pick server that anyone who makes Splatoon content is doomed to become like, well, at the time it was only Heavy, but is doomed to become like Heavy. And this attitude, this generalizing that everyone who makes Splatoon content or who indulges in it as a hobby or any other kind of thing is just like totally is doing it bad because they're either going to end up like Heavy or because they're making Splatoon content, they're associated with Heavy because Heavy also makes Splatoon Gmod content. And this began becoming extremely awkward to wade through. There was even a point in the server where, like, it was very early in my morning, I think in America that would have been like the afternoon, like say 1 to 2 to 3 p.m. There was a drama at one point within the server, and I think a couple of them were saying that the Splatoon people in the server, even if you just have it as an avatar, were getting really bothersome, and one person at one point started calling them, say, splat fags or some other type of derogatory term that really started to grate after a while. Especially when I was on at some points and tried to explain, say, my side of the story, because let me go into a bit of what's really going on, at least from what I can tell. The Splatoon Gmod SFM community, and especially the part that doesn't even use the source engine, which is most of Reddit, the subreddit regarding Splatoon, it is not right to generalize everyone under the same umbrella, because that isn't the truth. And especially given the parts that most people who are watching those videos aren't really seeing. The portion with Heavy and the children and Amiga, and like Heavy, okay, it's a general circle of Heavy, Amiga, Lizzie, Alex, and maybe a couple of their more minor friends who do stuff on DeviantArt otherwise. They're one part of the Splatoon Gmod source community. Remember how people were saying, I mean, Amiga said this as well. Remember how Amiga said, I'm not the founder of the Gmod Splatoon community. And I said in Pic's most recent video that I was actually laughing at that, because if anyone founded the Gmod Splatoon community, it would be the people who made the models in the first place, or Nintendo, because they made the series at all. But like Nintendo's kind of the starter, and then you have who started the Splatoon Gmod community, who made the models possible. And the first person who did that was Squidbot, Dr. Little Robot, who made who ported the first Splatoon 1 Inkling models into Gary's Mod and SFM. And like, the people who are making the animations are not the same people who are making the models. And the people who are making good animations and posters are not the same people who are either porting or even doing all the stuff making the community look bad in the first place. It's obvious that Amiga didn't start the Splatoon community. It's the people who ported the models that made that for him possible. And that's why I was laughing so hard, because he didn't start the community. It's obvious. He was only around for a long time and got really popular, and he's just boasting about how long he's been since the beginning. I've been around for the same amount of time, dude. You don't see me proclaiming superiority over anyone else. But that's how it is. But see, there are plenty of artists and plenty of people who just make Splatoon content because they want to, for some reason. They like the game, they like the good animators as animations, they like the world, the art style. There are plenty of people who do that and still dislike Heavy and still are within that community, and yet are not accountable for their actions just because Heavy in the same community technically has done stupider things and just happens to exist in the same place as they do. It's that's kind of ridiculous. Like, it's like a couple kids in a school playground, and one of them kicks a ball into a window and it breaks the window. You wouldn't necessarily blame the kid who's halfway across the field just because he also likes football as well, and he's like, well, you know, let's just assume as example, like people playing football and they knock a ball into a window. But like, you wouldn't blame the kid halfway across the field who's just playing football because he, you know, he just wants to, he likes it, and it, like, you would blame the person who's actually actively causing harm. And what a lot of these comments, and even what happened in the server, seem to really be thinking, which probably shouldn't be a thing, is that anyone and everyone who makes Splatoon content or who will end up in that community will end up exactly like Heavy and or Amiga. Or, if they're not going to end up like them, they're going to instead be associated with them, and that's a bad thing, because people can't apparently tell the difference between the people who are doing the good things and people who aren't. there are a lot of animators and artists, like the people who are mainly quiet about the whole thing. They mainly notice it if it crosses their path, but they don't see too much into it. They're not the ones making noise because they haven't done anything. But yet people are assuming the whole community is like that just because some people who have done some stupid things have done those stupid things, and other people who are good want to warn others about it and prevent another thing like that from happening. But the problem? People think that by trying to prevent the problem, we'll just stay out of indulging in the whole thing to begin with. And, you know, it's fine if you have no real interest in Splatoon to begin with. It's fine in that sense. But there are individuals, and I have definitely seen instances of this, there are people within the community who have seen these horrible acts time and time again. Most of them haven't received as much noise as they have now, but most of these people have left. They still have an Abby or something, or still indulge in the actual content, so therefore they're still technically in the community. It's just they're not majorly talking to most people. By their definition, I'm not in the community either because I'm not talking to people all the time. But these people have lost interest in Splatoon or anything just because these other people have done really bad things. And okay, let me recount what happened in the SM64 community and slightly why I made a video a long time ago because of that. A very long time ago, while I was making an SM64 series called The Curse of the Invincibility Frames, all the drama was happening in the SM64 community that happened, and while I was making Coif, as I refer to it, while I was making it, I was planning for another series that would take place after that point. And I would keep hyping it up because I really liked indulging in that. And, you know, I didn't want to let anything stop me at the time because I really liked making that content. And I really, really wanted to make this series because the writing ideas that I had while I was making it were, you know, really, really interesting to me. And I really wanted to make most of this a reality. In fact, I think I even scripted some of these. About 3 episodes of the series I had scripted, and I was really, really proud of the 3rd one in particular because it had some really good writing things. But the storyline of the series was based around individuals who I had involvement with. And, you know, this is partially me saying I'm not innocent in this at all, but it kind of forced my hand in that instance. So I was making the series, I was making stuff, I made a whole bunch of graphical assets for it, I made a whole bunch of stuff, but as I was doing so, because it was while all the drama was happening with SM3 and that I wasn't really willing to shut up about it, and that we were kind of separated and didn't really have a common interest anymore, most of the individuals who I had planned to be in the series, because this was based around real people, remember the storyline of the series was the actual people would be dimensional travelers, and that they would eventually find out that you have to change and wander off. But, like, you know, I would have done that written that during the course of all this drama because everyone was wandering off anyway. And soon enough, it came to a point where no one was around anymore. No one wanted to be perceived as their SM64 things anymore because it gave them bad memories of the SM3 incident and or other incidents that occurred because of relations to those particular incidents with Mr. Yellow. And eventually, because so many people ended up leaving of the people that I had wanted to plan my series around, it ended up forcing my own hand because the story just wouldn't make sense anymore. If there was so much of a lopside that there were going to be so many made-up characters in comparison to people that I'd already made, I didn't necessarily want to create that series anymore because it's never going to come to light. It's technically never going to come to light because no one wants to care anymore. And that is exactly why I didn't exactly want to make the series anymore. And that's why I put out that video saying so many people left me and I'm not going to make the series that I had promised that I was going to make because technically my hand was forced. So many people had left wanting to be perceived as that thing, and there weren't enough sufficient people for me to even consider making the series anymore. And you want to know what that did? It taught me never to make a story around real people ever again, because they're always going to change and they're never going to want to stay the same. The Splatoon community, likely many people are learning this lesson for the first time in their lives. It just so happens that I'm doing this the second time. Many people in the community, because of what's happened with the recent occurrences of Heavy and or Omega and or other people who have acted like jerks in the community, many people don't want to be associated with Splatoon anymore because what most people tend to do in the community, and I briefly went over this in a previous video, most people tend to just want to put their own character out there the same way the SM64 community did with the recolored Marios with color codes. And most people, once they find out that Heavy's done stupid things, they're going to be they know they're going to be associated with him for some awkward reason, and they don't want to indulge in Splatoon anymore because why do they want to do that if they're just going to end up in negativity? But yet they forget their own care and love that they had for the series in the first place. Hence, personally, why I don't make a series based around myself anymore. In fact, the only reason that you see the inkling that I do in the avatar and that I sometimes put in the video with a reactionary image is, as I've explained on DeviantArt, I don't necessarily like to roleplay directly as myself anymore. And this went as far back as to when I used to write fanfics back when I was 14 years old. I used to write those fanfictions about a character who I basically perceived as myself. That character was basically me. I wanted to view myself as that character. But after a while, after several conversations in real life with another individual who decided to do the same, and who I basically based that off of, I started feeling really uncomfortable about that, and eventually, I didn't want to roleplay as that character anymore. And essentially, I got rid of it. The same thing is going on with, technically, the character that I did with SM64. I never referred to that character. I know you see in the videos that I technically referred to that character as my name, but that character technically was supposed to be a separate entity from myself. It just had my username. It doesn't have my actual name. And I'm going one step further with that, with the inkling, in that I'm not even giving it a story to begin with. It doesn't have any relevance except that it's what I use whenever I want to show off an emotion that really only fits the inkling's face. That is it. That's necessarily why it's also the only reason it's only in my avatar and only in certain promotional things on, say, my DeviantArt or elsewhere. Otherwise, in terms of Splatoon itself, I'm usually writing my own stories, and this was slightly the perspective I was providing to the server when I was telling them that not everyone makes content in the vein of Heavy's own content. I, myself, personally, making Splatoon content generally counts as Splatoon stories because I enjoy Splatoon's world, and I really enjoy the way the characters, the Inklings and Octolings, look, and I necessarily like experimenting with that a lot, as very clearly evident on my DeviantArt. But I'm very, very much interested in the Splatoon world and the Splatoon story. Sure, it's very simple, but it's very flexible as well, and I've patched up tons of holes in it. Some particular scripts, most of which are just completely made up story fanfictions, are stuff that I'm very proud of having written, and even that stuff is slightly coincidental and even validated in some cases. by the official story when it comes to certain cases in the actual story's writing. So I kind of feel proud that I'm making content that I really, really enjoy and want to see myself, because it's riveting to me. And I really hate sometimes to see when people enjoyed making that content, even though it wasn't really what I would classify it as. I would classify it as the SM64 promotion gig. But when they just give up just because this perception is all that people in these comments and in the server will see, it's really kind of depressing. And, like, we really can't let this go on. Because, sure, they're definitely one part of the community who are in my opinion, they're definitely immature. The young children who have no idea that they're defending, they probably don't even know what a pedophile is, and they probably don't even know the signs of how to even spot one. They might even notice later in their life that those signs were even obvious in the first place. And they're gonna feel so stupid when they figure that out, some of them, probably. And if not, well, they'll get what's coming to them. And I'm not necessarily saying that just because they're gonna get something from me or any other artist who doesn't understand why they don't understand the whole thing, but they'll get what's coming to them if they don't see what's coming for them, if, they end up in the same situation themselves. But see, not everyone in the Splatoon community, like, I keep using that term. I keep using that term myself, and it's ridiculous. It's not one whole community. It's portions of individual parts of people with different interests, some of which just happen to collide with the same particular set of circles. It doesn't mean that you have to be associated with another individual just because you make the same content. Pool157 is a user who makes extremely interesting animations regarding the Splatoon series. They were particularly inspired by Alex Spider, the person of that particular circle. But they knew at the time, that back then when there were far less animations, that they wanted to make a more story-oriented series. I'm still watching their animations whenever they put them out. And they work very, very hard on those animations. On the side, they usually make extremely well-made SFM pictures with usually tons and tons of models in a particular scene. More recently, that tons and tons of models point becomes a bit more accurate, but you can kind of tell, like, not everyone in the Splatoon community is going to end up like Heavy or Omega, and you don't necessarily have to perceive just because they use things that are under the same umbrella, they use the same tags, they use the same assets and tools. That doesn't mean they're necessarily exactly the same or accountable to their actions as Heavy is. Just because they make Splatoon content that they enjoy seeing or that they enjoy doing doesn't mean they're gonna end up like Heavy. It doesn't mean that they have to be associated with Heavy or Omega just because they make that content. They use Gmod or SFM to make the same content. They use the source engine. It doesn't matter. It matters what you're doing. And in their case, the ones that are doing the bad things, yeah, it is lazy. It is badly done. Honestly, in my opinion, even though I haven't animated a single thing in Gmod ever, I still constantly think, gee, I wish they could have done better in terms of animating stuff. Does that mean that just because I make a couple of really crappy pictures on DeviantArt, and I say that really crappy myself, quality, does that mean that just because I make a few crappy pictures on DeviantArt about my story or about my characters or whatever, does that mean that I'm totally bad just because I'm making Splatoon content and I'm using Gmod to show you how that is, and it just so happens that there's a sexual predator in the community who does the same thing? I mean, by that point, the Mario, Pokemon, and any other community on the internet should basically fall under the same umbrella, and I already told you 4 to 5 years ago, this happened in another community where I was already educated on this kind of thing to begin with. So clearly, this is not going to only happen once, and it doesn't mean that the entire community is going to be fractured for life, Because, hello, you've got SMG4 proving that there are good people in the SM64 community today. And I know, I definitely have my own criticisms myself with SMG4, what with him constantly. Like, nowadays, he doesn't even use SM64 outside of a green screen map because he's constantly using Gmod for everything, so the SM64 bloopers aren't even SM64 bloopers anymore, they're just things, and, like, he also catches on to stuff his fans does. Like, you know, they're their own criticisms, but, like, this has already happened, and yet there are still members of that community still living and thriving today, and there are still plenty of SM64 videos. You could just look up SM64 bloopers, and there are still plenty being made that aren't in the name of Mr. Yellow. Oh, I'm sorry, Starman 3. It doesn't matter in that case, and it's not going to matter for the Splatoon community either. There are going to be plenty of artists, writers, and whatever who are making Splatoon content because they like the world, they like the character design, they like something about Splatoon, they play the game, they find it interesting, they don't play the game, they watch an animation that someone made, say, Pool or Tina or Violet Inkling, and they find that interesting, so they want to make something like it. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be associated with the negative people just because there are a couple of baddies in the community who do some really bad things. I mean, even after this, Ellie is still making pictures of herself messing around with her Splatoon character. Messing around with models that other people have made about the Splatoon series. She doesn't feel down just because she's dealt with all of that. I mean, okay, I'm sure she's definitely had a couple of things and do-overs with the whole thing. She probably has, you know, she probably has reflected on it a whole lot in her life. But you can clearly see it. She still enjoys making that content about herself, her character, and anyone else should feel obliged to do the same. People shouldn't have to feel repelled from the Splatoon community just because, or like the Splatoon Gmod SFM community, whatever portion it is you're in, they shouldn't have to feel repelled by it just because there's some dude who did some things with a girl and sent her almost nude. It doesn't matter because, like, even with people within the community leaving, like, you're really gonna give that up? Like, okay, I get if it's so much for you that you really can't handle it, and in some cases, okay, I get it. You don't want to be perceived as a nasty person just because there's another nasty person in the community making the same kind of content as you. Same in massive quotes because it's literally only the same program. But, like, say, I continue to make content about Splatoon. I sometimes do it in Gmod, but there's reasons why I'm not doing it so much, mainly because there's not as many assets I can use and it's bothering me. But that doesn't necessarily mean I feel I need to give up just because Heavy or Omega have done some stupid things in the past. I shouldn't be associated with what they're doing because the only thing we have in common is that we've used the same programs. I don't think I'm making the same content they would be making, and I don't think it's exactly the same on the other end either. I don't care if they've taken a break for the 15th millionth time. Just make it service to the point. Just when I make content that I make, I usually put it up with the philosophy that I usually put up content that I myself would want to see. That I myself would want to watch at a later date or find at some point on the internet whilst browsing. I put up stuff that I would want to see if I was browsing for it. And that's exactly the same with how I put up pictures, characters, stories, you name it, including YouTube videos. I put up stuff that I want to see. And I don't usually let anyone stop me unless when, as mentioned, it forces my hand, like in the SM64 scenario. Because, yeah, I did want to make that story, but that story just wouldn't make sense anymore to try and attempt to make, because most of those people wouldn't even exist anymore, in the same vein as they did before. But even me myself now with Splatoon, because every story I make now is usually with fictional made up characters who are made from scratch in my head. Most of the attitude I have surrounding Splatoon is probably the same attitude I had when I was making the SM64 stuff, but better now, because the characters are not specifically attributed to any existing individual. They're just portions of myself put slightly and altered and into Splatoon characters, because the Splatoon world is very nice to ride around, and I really like doing that. That doesn't mean I need to be reprimanded for making that content, which I was while I was in that server, by the same individual who called others splatfags for posting artwork or videos of their characters and personas in the server. Just because I or they make that content, it's I shouldn't even have to be explaining that, but for some reason I do. And that's kind of the saddening thing, isn't it? It's mainly why I left that server in the first place. I was starting to feel extremely unwelcome there, because they were just perceiving the entire community as that one circle that just happens to make really bad content. And as much as I, and not even just myself, there were others who would just say, I just want to make Splatoon content because I like making Splatoon content. But yet, they would just be reprimanded by this one dude, and some others would also just agree. I mean, I know, like, you don't have to like Splatoon. You don't have to like the content that we make, but you have to kinda understand that just because Splatoon, like, not everyone is gonna make bad content. And not only that, like, it also falls under the assumption when people just say, oh, Splatoon is for children because it's got an art style that's not necessarily realistic. It's stylized. It's all colorful. It's about kids fighting. It's about paint instead of blood. If you're gonna get at me about the painting stuff, I do it myself. I know. It's for kids, and you know, there was a really interesting video. I think Roger Van der Weed, or I don't even know his pronunciation. I don't think he even cares. He made a couple years ago about dissection of the word fun, and it was an interesting video. The guy makes animations in like Adobe Flash, and they're like those early type of Adobe Flash kind of things, so they're not necessarily the best animation, but I'm mostly there for the interesting perspectives that he tends to put on things. And in this video, he wasn't animating, but he had footage of himself in real life and a friend who he talks with, and they were doing some fun, quote, things in a park somewhere in, like, I don't know, it looked interesting. But they were dissecting the word fun, how people use it as like a weapon in discussion and such. And they even brought up at one point, this is mostly in relevance at some points to the Sonic series, since parts of this argument fall under there too. But even they were saying that the use of the word fun as a weapon in arguments, people usually say, like, they say it's for kids, so it's fun. But then, like, adults aren't allowed to have that fun because it's for kids. And, like, he also pointed out in the video that they say it's for kids. It's not for everyone or for the whole family. They just say it's for kids, and then they add on to that, it's for kids, so it's fun. And so, like, because it's fun, and, like, fun's a good word. Fun's so cute and innocent and happy. Fun allows you to, like the fun word allows it to be slightly inclusive to the adults. So then they're like, but I'm allowed to have fun, can't I?
It was really well explained in the video because, he likes dissecting this kind of stuff. Not just when it comes to stuff like that, but like stuff in relation to the Sonic series and Sonic fanbase arguments, which tend to bring that up a whole lot often. And similarly enough, people say similarly about Splatoon as well, even though there are pretty dark subjects in the actual games themselves. If they're only brushed over for even a second, they're still brought up in the first place. And yet people will constantly say, it's just for kids. And kids can indulge in it. And sure, it's definitely attributable to kids, but kids are not the only or the main demographic just because the art style is cutesy or it does some things that are kid friendly. And it also doesn't just mean that just because it's a Nintendo game. I mean, again, they bring these subjects up in Splatoon, if even for a moment. And it's all kid friendly and stuff, sure, but that doesn't mean that only kids will be attributable to it, or that it's only appropriate, that children are the only audience that can indulge in it or want to make versions of it just because it's aimed at that, so therefore only that audience should be indulged in it. Because you should say that about literally any property with an art style that has the massive fan base it has. If you had that mentality with concerning everything, and that's how the world should be, then nothing would be popular. Sadly. There's always going to be negativity like this. There's always going to be things like that. That's what I constantly tell myself and others. And just because there are some people who do these bad things does not mean that the entire community needs to be generalized for these things. Nor does it mean they're bad for indulging in that content, even if they're not of the supposed age in the first place. Especially if they're making content that they really like, and it shows in that content that they make. I mean, okay, I'm not going to proclaim I'm the biggest, best person in making Splatoon content in the world, but I would like to think that my content's not on the same level as Heavy's, and I would certainly like to think that a poster Pool makes an SFM after 4 to 5 or 12 hours has a bit more effort in it than, say, Omega or Heavy's animations that they probably worked on for, say, 4 hours tops, combining without all the breaks and hiatuses and everything. And it doesn't mean that just because it's Splatoon, it means it should be reprimanded, that they should be, put under scrutiny or something. That really shouldn't be the case. And, it's what these people really need to keep in mind when they are saying stuff like, oh, I don't necessarily want to join the Splatoon community now. Oh, I don't necessarily want to continue making content anymore, if they were within the community already. What about this bad thing? Is the Splatoon community going to keep going? Is it going to keep alive? Anything. Absolutely anything that gets popular. Absolutely anything. I need to make this extremely clear because a lot of people don't seem to get it. Anything that gets popular, any massive community, is going to have its bad sides. Any community. And I know this because, again, I'm used to it. I've seen this before. I've seen this very thing happen before, and it's not going to be my first time. This isn't going to be the only second time I have. I'm going to probably see this heaps of times into the future, as I said before. And that doesn't mean anyone's going to be worse for wear. It also doesn't mean that I need to be reprimanded, or anyone else for that matter, just because we make the content. Yes, they've done bad things. Yes, they do make that content, and they do make very lazy content. It doesn't mean that... It really doesn't mean that everyone is going to end up in the same pool as them, because we're technically not all following the same path, even if we make that content in our lifetimes. I technically left the server with the reason that I was feeling extremely unwelcome, and it was well after a point. It was several weeks into the point where I started to begin feeling that, where I just wasn't welcome in the server anymore, even while most of it had calmed down about most of the things. But, like, the things regarding people not, like, people saying, oh, you're bad for making Splatoon content, even while that had just slightly calmed down to a bit. But even then, there were several people who were in the Splatoon community beforehand who had also left. They had also just said goodbye. They didn't want to be associated with that server anymore. And I didn't want to talk to most of the people in that server anymore because I'd done mostly what I had set out to do from the beginning. I wanted to see their observations when it came to with Heavy, and after a while, they were mostly saying the same things over and over and over and over and over again, and I was getting sick of it. I didn't necessarily want to see any more of it, and since they weren't even necessarily being welcome, even in their art section, just because the content was showing an inkling or something in it, like, I didn't necessarily want to be there anymore. And sadly, I still see this when I scroll through the comments of the new Omega video, that some people don't necessarily want to indulge in Splatoon at all, even if they had the minorest of interests, just because there's a stupid dude in the community who does a similar thing. And I honestly feel sorry for those people, because Splatoon is not all about that. There's probably been plenty of occurrences in several types of Mario communities, but yet those still are up and alive. There's still content that's still being made of them, bad and good, and they're just being hidden because they're not making as much noise. It's exactly the same with Splatoon. It's exactly the same with any other community. If you had any sort of interest, join. Don't let Heavy and or Omega's actions in one loud portion of the community distract you from what you want to do. I know I don't necessarily want to be distracted anytime soon from it just because of that, because I have my own story and it's completely unrelated to anything they've ever made, except for the fact that it's Splatoon. I don't necessarily think I'm going to change that anytime soon. I might change it for a completely separate reason sometime soon that I might explain in like a video in like 2 or 3 or 4 years or something. It doesn't mean that I'm totally giving up on Splatoon just because some dudes had a nasty run out. Again, they forced my hand in the other instance. It wasn't because I quit because I was distracted just because the drama happened. I wanted to pull on while the drama was happening, but yet others didn't, and they ended up forcing my hand. I'm trying not to do that myself now, because anything I make is basically relevant to myself and myself alone. Others are getting super affected by this, and I honestly feel sorry for y'all. If you really, really like Splatoon or its world or its content, Nintendo is not going to endorse any of the things that happened within this community. And I certainly hope not, because once they do, they'd probably shut down the whole thing because of their attitude towards fan projects. But that aren't really fan art or some video or something. Like, they really hate mods and actual games. It's ridiculous. I'm not going to go into that now. But Nintendo's not going to endorse the actions of these particular 2 individuals. Even if they notice for like a second, they're not going to like it. They wouldn't like that their property is technically being used with 2 individuals for sexual predators, but they would have known this. They would know this with their other properties as well. Other properties such as Mario or Pokemon will have similar instances where these happened. In fact, I detailed one earlier in this video. It doesn't mean that Splatoon will be innocent. It isn't anymore. And it doesn't mean that content is somehow doomed and or you shouldn't indulge in it if you want to get involved, just because it's nasty. I mean, okay, you don't necessarily want an audience of kids, but if you don't want to attract those people, then fine. I don't necessarily want to attract those people, and whatever happens, happens. It's just the way the world works, and I just keep rolling along with it. You'll probably should keep doing the same, too. Heavily opinionated, I suppose, but can't really help it. It's a video I'm releasing on my channel, so I'll just say what I think. I guess, really, generalizing everyone under the same umbrella is not necessarily a good thing that people should necessarily be doing. Just because some people are doing some bad things in a community does not mean that everyone is accountable just because they themselves have done some really bad things. The people defending them are not necessarily in the clear either, as they don't necessarily understand why these things are so terrible as they are. But these people are not everyone you have to speak of. There are people who I've been inspired by to write and use Gmod with content for Splatoon that I really like. Even people who are someone a long time ago, when Splatoon had just started, had just made a Splatoon fanfiction. It was a fanfiction on the idea, what if the humans came back and enslaved the Inklings to study them and such. And the story was practically like a novel. It was extremely well written. It was about a young Inkling girl meeting a young Inkling boy, and the two were trying to escape their way out of the facilities that they were all trapped in. And some of these scenes got particularly gruesome when some really dark subjects entered the equation, and these scenes were written extremely well. In fact, that story has served as inspiration for some of the things that I do in my stories. Not necessarily some of the more gruesome stuff, but just some things that they mentioned in the story in terms that they used and ways the story was structured. It's just... And that person wasn't even related to this Gmod SFM community, except for the fact that I read that story once. They have made extremely good content, but no one's saying anything about that because, sadly, negativity is louder than positivity, and there's not much you can really do about that, I'm afraid, especially since this generalizing is already happening because people are only hearing the negative side. There are plenty of people, even the porters themselves, the people who are porting the models now, Fisher Metroid 101, Cruel Dude 100, and a couple of other people, they do not necessarily see these people as good people, and they themselves are the people who are making the models for the source engine and the community, and they don't necessarily see that as good. It's not good at all to them. But they're not making as much noise because, it happened. They know what happened, and they're not necessarily wanting to comment on it. But I guess everyone's afraid of the fact that people outside are just assuming that every single person within the community, just because they have an avatar of a Splatoon character, automatically means that they're associated with Heavy and means that they've done bad things or will do bad things because of Heavy. Just because he's done bad things, and there's been some noise about it. And honestly, that is really, really depressing. Because I guess the truth videos want to put out the truth. And yeah, those videos did put out the truth. It's not as if they were wrong, and what they necessarily said was, like, they didn't necessarily attempt to lie, but there's more behind the veil that nobody ever got to see, that definitely those videos lied about. And that is the perception about the real community. I mean, it should kind of be obvious. Some of the people, the Splatoon Avi people who are commenting, who are saying, "Good work, Pick, you've defeated the bad guys," shouldn't they be saying something about the community as a whole? that the entire community isn't like what you see in those videos? Shouldn't you be seeing for yourself that these people, real people that have seen these things, shouldn't you see that they shouldn't be put under the same umbrella as heavy just because they have a similar avatar? Maybe ever think yourself, you might be actually pleasantly surprised. Or maybe not. But you won't get anywhere if you don't think about it.